Welcome to this great event, and thank you all for being here. We would like to do a couple of things today, but we're celebrating World Shorebirds Day, which was, like most good conservation efforts, started by one person. And he had the vision that we needed to unite around the world to try to address or try to recognize the fate of shorebirds throughout all flyways in all hemispheres. Georgi Zimuli, and I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that right, lives in the UK, originally from Yugoslavia, and he, with his connections and understanding and interest in shorebirds, conceived of and launched World Shorebirds Day, and it, in a very short period of time, has really taken hold. And this we are hoping will be the first annual World Shorebirds Day, so all credit goes to him, and then other individuals who picked up the ball and are celebrating and counting shorebirds literally around the world right now. As the sun goes from one side of the world to the other, people are counting shorebirds. We're delighted to have some speakers here that I know will enthrall you. Many of them are well known to you. A couple of them are well known to you. And then we have a distinguished representative from the state here as well, who will finish up. Who was our keynote speaker. Mary Griffin is here, and we'll finish up. But we have some shorebird stories to tell you. There's something about shorebirds in general that the mystery of the birds themselves, the migration distances, the threats they encounter, that are worth understanding, and the people that have dedicated their careers to them. We have two people next to me who have dedicated their careers to birds in general, and a lot of that is wrapped around shorebirds and studying them and promoting. Welcome to this great event, and thank you all for being here. We would like to do a couple of things today, but we're celebrating World Shorebirds Day, which was, like most good conservation efforts, started by one person. And he had the vision that we needed to unite around the world to try to address or try to recognize the fate of shorebirds throughout all flyways in all hemispheres. Georgi Zimuli, and I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that right, lives in the UK, originally from Yugoslavia, and he, with his connections and understanding and interest in shorebirds, conceived of and launched World Shorebirds Day, and it, in a very short period of time, has really taken hold. And this we are hoping will be the first annual World Shorebirds Day, so all credit goes to him, and then other individuals who picked up the ball and are celebrating and counting shorebirds literally around the world right now. As the sun goes from one side of the world to the other, people are counting shorebirds. We're delighted to have some speakers here that I know will enthrall you. Many of them are well known to you. A couple of them are well known to you. And then we have a distinguished representative from the state here as well, who will finish up. Who was our keynote speaker. Mary Griffin is here, and we'll finish up. But we have some shorebird stories to tell you. There's something about shorebirds in general that the mystery of the birds themselves, the migration distances, the threats they encounter, that are worth understanding, and the people that have dedicated their careers to them. We have two people next to me who have dedicated their careers to birds in general, and a lot of that is wrapped around shorebirds and studying them and promoting their conservation.
This is really a glorious occasion for a variety of reasons. First of all, there are a lot of friends, long-standing and new, here, and there are a lot of people that were with us this morning on the walk that I did with Brad, and I suspect that there were a lot of people with Brian and Dory that weren't able to make this too. So this has been really, I think, a very illuminating response to an effort to recognize shorebirds on a grand scale. And I think grand scale is really part of where the story begins for me, because I started getting interested in birds as something of a neonate, it seems, but certainly by the time I was in, I was 10, 11, 12 years old, and about this big, I began to take serious notice of things with feathers. My family had friends in Chatham, and they had a house that looked across Nantucket Sound to Monomoy, and they had a son that was about my age, and the two of us would make these exploratory trips to Monomoy, which in those days was one continuous island, and only a fairly recently established island, because Monomoy for many years had been a peninsula about 12 miles long, extending south of the elbow of Cape Cod. In any case, it is arguably one of the premier shorebird areas in New England, if not in the Northeast. And it was where I first began to notice these glorious birds in huge numbers, where you could just walk amongst them and, you know, they'd take off and you'd see these flashing wing patterns and you'd hear their calls, and they'd take off and sweep around in flocks and so forth and so on. So early on, I was intrigued with these birds. I liked where I saw them. I liked the feel of salt water on my feet. I liked the expansiveness of Monomoy and Chatham and so forth. So that was a very seminal point in time for me. And as the years rolled forward, I ultimately in college had the opportunity to work for 3 summers for Mass Audubon at the Wellfleet Bay Wildlife Sanctuary. And this is where Brian's career and mine sort of almost intersect, because about that same time, and actually several years before, when Wellfleet Bay Wildlife Sanctuary in South Wellfleet on the Cape was established, Wallace Bailey and his wife Priscilla were the first directors, and were the only directors other than Bob Prescott, who is there today. In any case, one of Wallace's brilliant strokes in terms of ways to raise money for Mass Audubon was to take advantage of these glorious barrier beaches that at that time were accessible to beach buggies. Nobody heard me say this. In any case, for a number of years, until the Wilderness Act and various other political interventions made it impossible to run beach buggies on Monomoy National Wildlife Refuge and on Nauset Beach, what's now called Coast Guard Beach. Brian in his day and me in my 3 summers down there were on these outer beaches looking at shorebirds, interpreting shorebirds to people almost every day. And I think for me that was, if any of you are familiar with the writings of Malcolm Gladwell and Outliers and the 10,000 Hours, that's where Brian and I began to build up our 10,000 hours that eventually made us outliers. You can put any spin on that you want. In any case, from those early days of leading and interpretive shorebird trips and getting the benefit of Wallace Bailey's incredible knowledge, it's where I first had the opportunity to meet the bird artist Robert Verity Clem, who arguably is one of the finest bird artists, certainly of shorebirds, ever. I was introduced to the Shorebirds of North America, a book that he was illustrating about that same period in the mid-60s. Peter Matheson, the late Peter Matheson, wrote a series of essays within that book called The Wind Birds. And that wind bird name has resonated for me for many years, and subsequently the book was published as a separate. So for any of you who really want to get steeped in shorebird natural history and biology, I would encourage you to read that book. So again, college moved forward and so forth and so on. Eventually, the Manomet Bird Observatory, that would be the building right behind me and this landscape that we're standing and sitting on here, was established. And in the early years, one of the former state ornithologists of Massachusetts, a man named Joseph A. Hager, a.k.a. Archie Hager, early on took an interest in the developing facility here, and became a member of the executive committee and was very formative in establishing a lot of the work that still is carried on by Manomet in terms of shorebirds. And I don't want to step on Brian's toes here, but Brian, I think, was somebody who also fell under the spell of Archie Hager. And so it was through my association with Archie that I began to get a sense of the past and the present at the time, and maybe a window to the future, which is now, in terms of what was happening to shorebirds, what had happened to shorebirds, and what could happen to shorebirds. In any case, eventually I had the opportunity to go to James Bay with the Canadian Wildlife Service, and Guy Morrison, who at that time was heading up most of the shorebirds work in Canada and internationally in terms of Canada and beyond, invited me to go up and band shorebirds for a couple of weeks. This was back when the Canadians were involved in a very massive semi-palmated sandpiper project where they were color-dyeing birds. Some of you may remember seeing these little beach pumpkins running around with dye on them and flags and so forth. So I was engaged in James Bay for several weeks in August, and had an opportunity to see one of the great staging areas of a very abundant shorebird and find out more about what they were all about. Moving forward, I began to get into the tour leading business, so I had a chance to see shorebirds in the Arctic and in Alaska and Iceland and Patagonia and South America and so forth and so on. And then, eventually, a guy named Charles Duncan, a name that I'm sure many of you will remember as the recent past director of the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network, the very essence of all these flags that you see around here, because these are all WHSRN members internationally in the Western Hemisphere. Charles at that time was teaching chemistry at the University of Maine at Machias. He had the brilliant idea, let's establish a birding workshop concept that I'm going to call the Institute for Field Ornithology, and we will take advantage of the university's facilities in the summer, which are essentially unoccupied. We'll invite serious birders to come for week-long workshops on whatever. So with that seminal little seed, I got a call out of the blue from this guy, Charles Duncan, who I didn't know from Adam, and he said, I understand you're teaching a shorebird course here at the Manomet Bird Observatory. Explained what he had in mind. Would I be interested in coming to Maine and doing such a thing there? And I said, sure, give it a shot. I was teaching in those days. It was another life. And so for a series of years, beginning in 1984, I had the opportunity to start teaching these week-long shorebird courses in Maine, and eventually those segued to Canada, and I was based in Sackville up in the Bay of Fundy for a number of years. Then we ran several here in Massachusetts. The program, the Institute for Field Ornithology, eventually transitioned to the American Birding Association, the ABA. I was on the board there at that time, so I was able to help grease the skids to move that program over, because when Charles left the University of Maine, the university had no interest in continuing the program, so that program continued on to this day. In any case, as a result of having taught many, many hundreds of people, adults and young adults, shall we say, something about shorebirds in various venues and so forth, I had increasingly the benefit of seeing other people's enthusiasm. If I had to name a bird on planet Earth that I have invested more time and energy in than any other single species, it's white-rumped sandpiper. And you would say, why? What's so special about the white-rumped sandpiper? Because a lot of people can't figure out how you recognize them. And I have spent literally hours going back to when I worked for Mass Audubon right up until almost today, trying to help people sort out how you recognize white-rumped sandpipers. But once they get it, it's lovely to see that light go on. Yes, I can do it. I know what they look like, I know what they sound like, I know something about them, and so on. So I had the benefit of the enthusiasm generated by people as they began to find out more about shorebirds and recognize that they weren't just little gray things that you'd see running around on the beach. When we moved that program up to the Bay of Fundy, a place that some of you who perhaps have never been must go, I was introduced to some of the most spectacular shorebird concentrations arguably in the world. In fact, I was up there several weeks ago after having not been there for quite a number of years to see these giant shorebird roosts where all of these semi-palmated sandpipers that start up in James Bay eventually move down into the lower Bay of Fundy before they head off for Suriname and the northern coast of South America for the winter. And to see these flocks just rippling like ribbon candy and the northern lights, you know, it's just an amazing thing to see, you know, 50, 60, 70,000 sandpipers all moving as one. A peregrine, merlin comes through. and they just ripple and flow. It's spectacular. So I think the combination of my early interest in birds and the fact that I had the benefit of some great experiences and some great teachers and some great mentors, living in a state where shorebirds are a major commodity with a sad legacy of persecution and demise in some cases for birds like the Eskimo curlew, and some with great sort of mysteries. Brian's going to talk a little bit about one of the mysteries, the red knot. Certainly the Hudsonian godwit was a bird that Archie Hager was particularly interested in. There's still a lot of things we don't know about those. And when you read about this moonbird, this red knot that's made how many trips back and forth from Patagonia to Arctic Canada so that it could have flown back and forth to the moon how many times, just amazing for birds that's the size of a robin. So I think if you take all of these collective experiences, and especially the opportunities that I've had to work with other people and see them get sort of lit up, as it were, by sandpipers and shorebirds, some rare, some common, but always in huge numbers and always in spectacular ways, that for me is why, you know, supporting a program like Manomet Shorebird research efforts and the work of people like Brian, who spent a lifetime studying just one or two species, is very much a worthwhile endeavor. So I think my bottom line suggestion would be, if you want to do something really important, write a check. Take out your wallet, okay? Because I was involved in a presentation last evening, and I used this example, which I've used before because I love it. But it basically speaks to the notion that an individual can make a difference. And it was Gandhi who made the statement at one point that for anyone who believes that an individual can't make a difference, they've never slept in a room with a mosquito. Thank you.
I want to talk about, I just want to tell a couple little stories. And it takes place in Brazil, okay? And as we realize that these shorebirds that are so precious to us up here are migrating to Patagonia or where have you in South America, we also realize that the same issues that might be threats to shorebirds up here are threats to shorebirds down there. And so is there some way we can start engaging people to think about that? And so we decided that with help of some funds from World Wildlife Fund, we decided that we would have a workshop in southern Brazil. So we got all our stuff together and we put it in boxes, and I had to lie on some of them. The boxes had the explosives, that there was no way that you could get that to South America. Really, it was a catch-22. You had to lie. But anyway, we got it all there. But it got lost on the way for 10 days maybe, and then Pan Am finally got it to us. So meanwhile, we were having the classroom part of the workshop and getting ready to go out and do our field work at a place called Lagoa de Peixe, which, if you speak Portuguese, translates to this elegant name, Fish Lagoon. And so Fish Lagoon is very shallow, and when the wind blows from the north, the water all blows to the south end and vice versa. So there's almost always mud flats there, and shorebirds love that because there's always good feeding there. They don't have to wait for the tide, they just wait for the wind, and one place or another. So anyway, we were having a devil of a time. We'd taken equipment, we trained people how to use our cannon nets, and we talked about shorebird biology. We spent a week doing all the training, and we got out there, and the first thing we did was get our vehicles mired in this soft mud out in the, you had to cross the lagoon, and we got it totally mired. But we did have boards on the roof. We carried boards with us, confidence, And so we were able to tip the Volkswagen bus up on its side and put a board onto one side, and then we did this board by board and finally got it up. And one of our goals in all of this was to have it be an international effort, and so we had friends from Canada, and we had friends from Argentina and Uruguay and Brazil, and I don't remember, Venezuela, and so it was really international. And but the Argentine woman wasn't going to get out of that Volkswagen. She was just not going to get her feet muddy. And so we tip it over with her in it. So we finally got our camp all set up. This was in, well, it was in a fishing village, but it was more like a couple of shacks that did have doors. They had latches even, but the floors had big slats in them, and you know they were great places for mosquitoes and whatever. But anyway, we stayed in these little buildings, and we tried and could not figure out the habits of knots well enough to use our net, our cannon net that we'd brought, rocket net actually in the old days, and that we brought down to train these Brazilians to use, and so that they could sort of carry on with this wonderful tradition of learning about shorebirds. So one night we decided we needed to find out where they were at night. So got our flashlights, wandered out into this lagoon. It's a dark night. It was a really dark night, and I was sort of sloshing along in water, maybe about that deep, I guess. And I saw this island. I say, I don't remember any island out here. And so I was beginning to think I was really lost. And so I walked a little farther, and the island moved. And the island was as big as this tent, bigger, twice as big as this tent. And it was birds. It was red knots. This giant, huge flock of red knots that had gone to sit the night in the middle of this shallow lagoon. What better place? I mean, you hear a fox coming, you hear, you know, any predator coming, slopping across. You hear Brian coming, and so I just wanted to share the whole idea of watching an island move out in the water. Okay? So that's kind of the way these birds travel in life. They find places that work for them for one reason or another, predator protection maybe in this example, and of course lots of food. When the wind blew in the day, they had tons of snails in the upwind end of the lagoon. So it was like not heaven. Godwits too, Hudsonian godwit, lots of other kinds of birds there. So this spot, it turns out, was the major stopover place of Hudsonian godwits migrating north from Argentina, and they would, and red knots, and white-rumped sandpipers, and a bunch of native species to austral regions of South America. It was a place where they really concentrated. And you know, we were able to show this. We were able to show that this spot was of huge international importance to wildlife populations. We were working with some Brazilians who were just really on the ball. I love Brazilians. On the ball, really hustling, immediately set up television station interviews, contacted politicians, and within 9 months that place was designated a national park.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, but that's what a lot of this shorebird work is all about, is finding and defining, and it all came from a little clue, calling around to people, where are there red knots in South America? They're going to be somewhere. And, you know, a friend who had been with the, I think the CIA, but anyway, the State Department said, oh yeah, the coast of Rio Grande do Sul in southern Brazil, I've seen lots of knots there. Well, what do you mean by lots? Oh, I've seen thousands. Whoa, you know, and so we just almost never get to see thousands of red knots anywhere. So, lickety-split, you know, 3 years later, we're down there. And having raised our $5,000 and having gotten commitments from all the people to attend this workshop and so forth, and you know, so that's just sort of an example of, you know, how you try and start getting at these issues of working internationally for birds, critters that are migrating on a hemispheric scale. Your conservation has to be, and your research has to be at that scale. Even if your budget's so low you can't even see it. And so that's one example. How am I doing? Another 5 minutes? So I have another story about migration. Everybody thinks that shorebirds have to be totally exhausted when they migrate over the ocean to South America, okay? And so I have this quick story of being on the coast of Suriname near Brazil, French Guiana, and watching a flock of golden plovers. I usually always talk about red knots, but this is golden plovers coming in over the ocean, clearly a flock, and low to the ocean, maybe 20 or 30 feet above the water. Clearly a flock that had probably left Newfoundland or Nova Scotia or someplace 3 or 4 days earlier, coming in to landfall in South America. And I fully expected these birds to come down and flop down on the beach and pant and, you know, just, that's what I expected to see. And so as they come close to the beach line, the flock starts going up and up and up and up and goes out of sight. And I know those birds were coming in from an 80-hour flight over the ocean. And so we have this idea that that this migration system that they have has got to be terribly dangerous and terribly stressful. And yet if you think about it, it's evolved. For some reason or other, it's advantageous for these birds to migrate these huge distances. Think about it though. 24 hours of sunlight in the summer and 24 hours of sunlight in the summer during our winter up here. I mean, why not? And tons of food, the seasonal bloom of food, so it makes sense evolutionarily. But it's a fragile system in our world today. And so that's a lot of what this Shorebird International Shorebird Day and our focus on shorebirds at Manomet is about. And it's been totally exciting to be a part of it.
I have a quick story to follow Brian's, and then Meredith is going to come up in just a minute and talk a little bit more about the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network and where we're going there. I'm very lucky to be following Brian and others in the field of shorebird conservation and research, and one of my pivotal moments was actually I spent a lot of time down in the Georgia coast, and I was working for the New York Zoological Society down there, and it was about 1990. And I had the opportunity to go out on a little kayak to a tiny little sandspit island off the coast, and there was I noticed right away in this island that it was all washed over. There was no vegetation, that it was covered with tracks, and the whole center part of the island that was maybe as big as a football field or so was covered with tracks. It was all packed down, and I didn't really recognize the size of the tracks or didn't know who made those tracks, and there were no shorebirds around. And so about 2 nights later, curious biologist, I went out to this island and decided to wait to see what birds were going to be coming into the site. And the sun went down, and on the Georgia coast in the spring, this is early May, on actually a windless night, there's something called a sand gnat, which is you no see them around here. But this was with no wind on the spring night in Georgia. This was the night for the sand gnats to come out. So I started getting lower and lower in the sand, and there was a little bit of moon, or the clouds coming over the moon a little bit. So I was able to see a little bit of the beach, but dimly. And I was actually hiding, getting down lower in the sand, and covering myself with sand to stay away from the gnats. I ended up spending the entire night out there, and nothing showed up. Right away. Nothing showed up right away. But about midnight, when the tide really got high, I heard this flute-like call coming, and it came in from high in the dark, and I tried to look. I had a hat on. I was looking down the beach to see some birds landed. Then more came in, more flute-like calls, and it was a beautiful sound. It was a really nice. If you were going to make up on a contact appeasement call or a contact call for shorebirds, it'd be a perfect one. and these birds started gathering. And in about an hour and a half, I was surrounded by thousands of whimbrels. They were coming in as the tide came up. They were going to the farthest outer barrier islands, and I think it's a great horned owl driven behavior. They go to the farthest reaches of these sandspit. So I got up in the morning, and when I could really see, and they leave right at dawn, and was able to see these birds leaving. And it was a really pivotal moment to see maybe 4,000 or 5,000 whimbrels leaving in large flocks. And it turned out that there was a regular rhythm of these birds feeding in the marshes. It was a staging site on the coast of Georgia for thousands of these whimbrels, and using the outer beaches of the coast, and then distributing themselves throughout about 400,000 acres of salt marsh, prime salt marsh, on the Georgia coast. Really unique, and that work actually has continued. I came up here with Manomet and working with the Center for Conservation Biology at William and Mary. We're tracking these birds now, which is kind of the next generation of shorebird discovery. We're really at a pivotal point where the technology to follow these birds to exact locations is not only proving the idea of Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network and how right the founders were, people like Brian who started them. He also started the International Shorebird Survey that fed into the development of the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Network. But now we're at a point where we can see where individual birds are going, and they are reiterating and confirming what the conservation activity and efforts of people, back in the 70s and 80s really was leading to. So we're at a really neat point as we're celebrating today. Understand that there are stressed populations. There are something like 100 pairs of these spoon-billed sandpipers left over in the other continent, in the Pacific Eastern Flyway, and we're with red knots about to be or potentially listed as endangered. There are some critical points, but we are also at an exciting research end. We'll be able to find out and work with as many partners as you see around the room here, all of these 13 countries that are WHSRN members, to try to do some great things for shorebirds in the near future.
I'm on a strict timeline, so I need to keep myself to some notes here. But yeah, as Brad said, I started here at Manomet Center as a conservation specialist for the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network, WHSRN, as you've all heard. Before that, for about 9 years, I worked for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service outside of D.C. I was involved there with international migratory bird conservation in various forms. And so when Charles Duncan, the director at the time of WHSRN, hired me, I really wasn't that strong in shorebird ID or ecology. I thought that was going to be really a detriment to me. But he just said he saw things in me that maybe you couldn't teach someone, and the rest I could learn. And I did. I learned from Brian on a lot of field trips. I learned from Winn through the different workshops he was talking about. And so it's just an honor to be celebrating the same event with my mentors. And so it's just been a real honor. And you too, Brad.
From nemesis to mentor.
That's the scope of our relationship. But I continued learning. I learned from Charles, and I learned from my new boss, director Rob Clay, who's based in Paraguay. And that's really a lot of what today is about with World Shorebirds Day. The founder of it, Georges Zimoui, is how the woman on the Google Translate pronounced it. I have to hear her voice in my head to say it. He's Hungarian. Wonderful man, and he really was wanting to have this day in part be about re-energizing long-term birders and also introducing new people to shorebirds. And I think we've done that today. I know in our troop in Ellisville we had 2 new birders, never been on a birding trip before. So that's really exciting. And so I was thinking about what to say today, and I thought, where is home to a shorebird? They call the hemisphere home. So where is the office when you work for the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Preserve Network? And for us, that's the hemisphere. So today we have Lisa Shibley. Some of you met her at Ellisville. She's still based here at headquarters. I started here for 5 years before moving to Maine. We have another colleague, Laura Chamberlain. She's at Delaware Bay in the state of Delaware. It's a Western site. Diego Luna is in Santiago, Chile. And also our new director, Rob, is in Asuncion, Paraguay. So our office is the hemisphere. But that whole bold concept of WHSRN, it really started here. It started with people like Brian and other visionaries in the U.S. and Canada, Argentina, and all of the countries that he's mentioned. And their mission was to find all the dots and connect them. And you heard great stories about how they went about finding all the dots and just where are these birds going and the great lengths that they went to in the 80s and earlier. No internet, no Skype, no nothing. How do you that amazes me. So, we've had a good long 25-year history now with WHSRN, started in 85. Does anyone know what the first WHSRN site was? You are recused. I think Molly? Delaware Bay. Exactly. And straddles New Jersey and Delaware. And Brian mentioned that. How about the second WHSRN site? Also around the same time, 86, 87. I hear Sackville? Yeah. Yeah, the Bay of Fundy.
Nice job.
Bay of Fundy, which Wayne mentioned, and having been there before. And I see some sign language. I'm not sure if I can
I didn't know that. She came up with that.
Okay. So fast forward 25 years, and I would have told you on Thursday that we had 89 sites in the network, and these 13 countries that are represented here. And yesterday we have a hemispheric council that approves the nominations and entrance into WHSRN. So it's my great pleasure, on behalf of WHSRN, to announce that we now have our 90th site as of yesterday. So it's a big deal. Where? Oh, you want to know where? Okay. I can't ask you to guess that one. Bahia de Tobari. It's Tobari Bay. It's in west coast of Sonora in Mexico. It's right along the Gulf of California. And it's a site of international importance. We have 3 different levels: regional, international, hemispheric. So they qualified at international because they have more than 10% of American oyster catchers down there. So, wow. And various other species too. So next week we are going to be announcing that more officially, but it's just, the timing was wonderful to be able to announce that today for World Shorebirds Day. So yeah, 90 sites now, 13 countries all around here, and that represents more than 32 million acres of shorebird habitat that is on people's radar to protect and to manage. And the difference with WHSRN, as opposed to other programs that set aside or recognize land as being important for shorebirds, is not only do we have biological criteria for how many birds are there or percentages of certain species populations, but we have another criteria in landowner commitment and managers' commitment, and getting that support from stakeholders around a site. So it's a very bottom-up approach. It's voluntary, and they come to us to say, we've got a great site here, we think it qualifies, and let's work together to nominate it. So that integration of people in conservation has really been a hallmark of the WHSRN strategy, and that's the piece I wanted to share today, because we heard wonderful stories about the birds. We're all here today because of our own individual stories and experiences. And WHSRN is really about the people that get connected through the birds, because the birds certainly connect us, as we've all heard, as they move throughout the whole hemisphere. And I think that connection is really amplified today with World Shorebird Day, because we're sitting here, and as they've mentioned, and anything we do on any given day in the Western Hemisphere for shorebirds, and it's not only happening up and down the Western Hemisphere, but we're thinking today that it's happening in Africa and in Spain and India and Europe, and that's just so neat. I'm just very grateful to George Simui for just thinking to remind us all about that on this global scale. And we've talked a lot about how the majority of the shorebirds and their populations, they're always on the move, constantly on the move. So we all have them for just such a short window of time, you know, for most species. And then they're off, and they do this every year. And, you know, being able to tell people about this, you know, because they may not notice that they're here and then they're gone, and being able to share that story to people on the ground throughout the hemisphere, that these birds are here for just a short period of time. And one of my favorite stories from when Charles was in Argentina, he was working with some partners in southern Argentina. They had a chance to meet with the mayor of this small town. And they were explaining to him about the red knots and how they come here and they winter here, and the great lengths that they come to or go to get here. And he said, and I'll say it in English, but you know, so you mean these birds are coming here? They're flying 9,300 miles, over 9,000 miles, and they're coming here to spend the winter in my town. It's like, wow. It's like, it really triggered this sense of hospitality in him, and which is partially a cultural wonderful thing about Latin America, but he really was sincere. He's like, we have a responsibility to take care of them while they're here. You know, it's like, come into my home if you want. You know, I will feed you and make sure you're tucked in at night. I mean, it just triggered this real sense of responsibility and hospitality. And I just thought, you know, if more places could see shorebirds through such humble eyes and such proud eyes, you know, how wonderful that would be. So that's WHSRN. It's people signing up voluntarily to commit to doing good things for shorebirds, to being the best hosts that they can possibly be to the birds while they have them, and then doing their best to send them on their way and hope people further up are doing the same thing. And that's really what WHSRN is about. And people do that at individual sites. We do it as a chain, kind of all along when we get to work together and coordinate on these flyway issues. So a big thank you to everyone who came out today for all the ways that you're being good hosts to birds while they're in Massachusetts. We have 2 WHSRN sites in Massachusetts at Manomet, which Wayne and Brian had mentioned, and also the Great Marsh, of which Parker River National Wildlife Refuge is one partner within that larger site. So just a big thank you to everyone and for the wonderful hosts that you are to shorebirds here.
This morning with folks, and I learned a lot. And I want to say, you might have noticed from the comments, I am not an ornithologist, and any very specific bird questions, I'm going to very quickly refer to the colleagues to my right and left. But I probably learned as much as you did. But I'm going to sort of approach this from a different perspective, is talking about, you know, we've been at the global level. I've had fun listening to all the places that Wayne Petersen and Brian travel, and you know where they go to do their scientific and birding work. We're going to come down a little bit to Massachusetts. You know, what happens here in our state and in our backyards that contribute to the conservation of these shorebird species, and how does that connect to these larger global efforts for these species that travel so far? So just a brief bit of background about Department of Fish and Game and our various programs and offices. Just to give some context, we're a small agency. For those that may not know us, we have about 300 people, which is small in the world of state government, but I think we do a lot with a little. And our largest division is the Division of Fisheries and Wildlife, and I'm going to talk a lot about their work in the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program that does a lot of work with birds, and shorebirds in particular. We have a division of marine fisheries who does its best to regulate the wild and woolly world of commercial and recreational fishing, and a division of ecological restoration that restores rivers and wetlands and coastal estuaries all over the state. And we also have a small office of fishing and boating access that if you have a boat and take it out to look at shorebirds, you might leave from one of their 275 sites statewide. So, you know, I think one of the things that I find most wonderful about the concept of the first World Shorebirds Day is how it really gets us to focus on the fact that we really have to, you know, start with work in our own backyards, but we have to make an effort to work across national, regional, and state boundaries and across organizational boundaries with a variety of partners and different nonprofit organizations to really take the management actions to protect these shorebirds that are, marathon migrants, many of them. So, it's a wonderful way to to get us thinking in the right direction of a World Shorebirds Day. Shorebirds are a fleeting resource in our state. They pass through between wintering and breeding areas, and they definitely enliven our shores for the time that they're here while they're fueling up to continue their journey. So, I think it's, many of you are already aware of this, but it's sort of good to start from, what are the challenges of migratory shorebirds, and how does that relate to the actions that we all need to take to better protect and conserve these birds. So to follow up on some of the earlier comments, obviously they need tremendous fuel reserves to accomplish nonstop flights of thousands of miles, but the resources that they need may be ephemeral. They may be out of sync with when they arrive in a certain location, and they may be unavailable due to a localized harvest of the resource they need to depend on. And these sort of challenges are compounded by other challenges, like some of the species have only a limited number of stopover sites along their path. There may be habitat denigration or disturbance. In some countries and locations, there's unmanaged hunting that can occur in certain key sites that can affect populations. And in highly developed areas, you've got issues with development, recreation, and abundant predator populations. So, there are multiple things that can affect shorebird migration and breeding and success in raising their young along their journey. So, in thinking about how do you meet these challenges, I think all conservation ultimately starts at a local level. And so, the best conservation actions are for us to think about what can we do here in Massachusetts, what can we do in our own backyard, but how do we reach across and work with other countries, regions, and other partners to take action on a global level. And obviously Manomet a number of the partners here, but Manomet has been a leader in this sort of global type of work and approach for a long time. So they've been a great partner with us and with many others in Massachusetts. So they've been kind of leading the way, and it's very appropriate that they're our hosts for World Shorebirds Day. So I was going to talk about a couple of sort of key shorebird species in Massachusetts and what kinds of actions are going on here in our state to better conserve or protect them. Just as kind of examples of how do you think about, how do you get at the sort of problems and issues with migratory shorebirds, and some of the challenges in managing them. And the first species I was going to talk about is one that the Division of Fisheries and Wildlife and the Natural Heritage Program has a really long history with, a 30-year or more history, and that's the piping plover. And some of us, we were lucky to see some of those this morning on Plymouth Beach, and probably you did at Ellisville as well. But that's a species that is on the federally threatened endangered species list. In the mid-1980s in Massachusetts, our late senior zoologist, Dr. Scott Melvin, who a lot of you may know, he expressed concern about the future viability of the species in Massachusetts at all. And for over 3 decades, Scott Melvin and a number of others, Mass Audubon has been a tremendous partner in this effort, have worked very concertedly to better protect the piping plover, often to the chagrin and to the distress of a lot of beachgoers. And it's a lot of circles. It's not the most popular species, but I think it shows how a long-term effort, a 30-year effort, actually can have success. And the foundation of that success, actually, and this is sort of coming from my roots, I'm not an ornithologist, I'm an environmental lawyer, the foundation of that success was the federal and the state Massachusetts Endangered Species Act, and also the Wetlands Protection Act in Massachusetts. That is the foundation of a lot of the protection efforts that have been taken to protect the piping plover. So, we have Division of Fisheries and Wildlife and Natural Heritage work with state, local, and private entities to try to institutionalize the management and monitoring of these birds and provide technical assistance over a long number of years. And they do thousands of reviews of projects that may impact plover habitat and do environmental reviews to try to lessen or avoid those impacts. And the result of all this work, although again not popular in some circles, is that you know, it's an emerging success story. Massachusetts currently supports the largest population of the threatened piping plover of any state on the Atlantic coast. And these intensive measures are largely responsible for a more than 400% increase in abundance of the species. So in the early 1980s, there was about 130 pairs of these birds, and now there's more than around 700 pairs. So, you know, in 25 years, that's a very substantial increase. And with that increase, and this is sort of the human side of taking management actions, is a substantial increase in sort of, what would you call it, customer dissatisfaction or conflicts, conflicts with the public about plover management. You know, and the things that we hear the most are curtailment of human recreational activities and loss of revenue. This is a big issue with cities and towns about, you know, being able to issue beach permits and offer their beach areas for more recreational activity and the revenue associated with that. And so, you know, now that the population is expanding, those conflicts are increasing, and we are, you know, Heritage Program is looking at engaging stakeholders about sort of re-looking at our plover management techniques and approach, and developing a habitat conservation plan that would provide a protective plan for the plovers, but allow some increased flexibility for beach managers that are sort of in the eye of the storm of some of these conflicts. And, you know, I'm saying this out to a group that may or may not think this is a good idea, because we want to engage in the full, what I like to call the cacophony of life in government. You know, we don't want just all the beach goers that would like more access to show up and work with us on this. We want birders to do that as well, and hopefully that will get us to the best place in this process. So that is, you know, so, you know, that's a species that has a lot of intensive science, surveying, and beach management through a regulatory framework in terms of actions to take to restore it. And a lot of the actions that we've taken on shorebirds, on the plover, have definitely benefited other species like the least tern that are, you know, sympatric in the same area. So they have those benefits for other shorebird species as well. The same sort of group of partners in the network that have worked on the plover restoration have also done a lot of work to benefit the American oyster catcher. And Manomet certainly has been a key partner in this. So we have worked with a coastwide network of cooperators to, you know, bird banding, surveying, and information to get more information on the oyster catchers. And Manomet is a leading partner in the American oyster catcher work group. A lot of people today have talked about the red knot, and I certainly wouldn't. If someone's written a book about it, I wouldn't add much to the birding side of that. But I was gonna talk a little bit, actually, from the fisheries management side of the red knot, which I find very interesting. So our Division of Marine Fisheries, when I was thinking about, you know, what are we actually doing to protect shorebirds, it was interesting to me to think about that almost every part of our department, except maybe the people that build the boat ramps, is doing something that really works on protecting shorebirds. So an example of that on the fisheries management side is the Division of Marine Fisheries. So this, you know, long-distance migrant bird, the red knot, eats horseshoe crab eggs. And, you know, DMF, they have this wonderful language because they're marine biologists, and they talk about gut studies. And so they've done gut studies. And they work with other states, because fish are migratory just like birds. They work with states, their fish biologists counterparts in Delaware, and they found that about 60% of the diet red knots, and their spring migration is horseshoe eggs, horseshoe crab eggs. So so at the same time we have a serious decline in the red knot. We've also had a serious decline all up and down the East Coast, Florida to Maine, of horseshoe crabs. I always, as a kid, I used to always go out on the beach and see horseshoe crabs everywhere, and now, sadly, I rarely do, you know. So I think we've all noticed that, even if we don't know all the scientific reasons for it. And part of the reasons is it's a bait fishery, many places, and in Massachusetts it's bait for eel, whelk, and lobster. And then Brian, I think, talked about the biomedical industry they bleed horseshoe crabs, and I just find horseshoe crabs really interesting. You know, the blood of horseshoe crabs is copper-based. That's why it has that bluish color. It's not iron-based like our blood, and they use it. You know, very important industry. They use it to detect contaminants in a bunch of biomedical and drug products, and it forms a gel or a gel that detects the presence of contaminants. So the biomedical industry, there's a big industry leader in Pleasant Bay. They harvest horseshoe crabs and, you know, extract the blood, and many of those are returned to the ocean. And we used to think the success rate of that was you know, only about 10% loss on the return of horseshoe crabs, but now I think that's under a great deal of scientific debate. I think our biologists think it's closer to 20% at least. You know, other people would dispute that, but I think it's fair to say it's higher than we once thought. So anyway, you've got harvest of horseshoe crabs, but for fishing purposes and for medical purposes, and a decline in the population, and you've got these migratory birds coming from South America to Alaska and the Arctic tundra, needing them for food. So a management action that we would take to protect a species like the red knot, which actually we just took over the last couple of years. There's now a moratorium on new permits for harvest of horseshoe crabs by Division of Marine Fisheries, and there's also they've instituted spawning closures, which are so horseshoe crabs spawn on a lunar cycle. So now there are closures for 2 days before full and new moons and 2 days after, from April to the end of June. And when you think about it, one thing that's also interesting about horseshoe crabs is, you know, most fisheries you need a lot of expensive gear. You need a big boat with a trawl net, and, you know, there's a big investment there. Horseshoe crab fishing, you can go out in a bucket, with a bucket at night during, you know, these moon cycles on the beach, and you can collect an awful lot of horseshoe crabs, and you can take a significant whack out of a very localized population. So, you know, I think we have instituted some limits on horseshoe crab fishing, particularly during the spawning time. Whether that will be enough, I'm not sure, but we definitely got a lively crowd when we have reg hearings to put these management actions in place, and we had a lot of fishermen, a lot of lobster fishermen who are local. We had a lot of people from the biomedical industry, and I was very proud that I think Bob Prescott and the folks in Mass Audubon were there on behalf of the birders and the group. So it was good that they showed up and expressed their interest in this. So anyway, that's just sort of an example of the sort of broad array of things you have to think about in terms of what are the tools at your disposal to get at protecting migratory shorebirds.